This is the biggest single-piece television you can buy today. It's the Hisense 116-inch UX TV with RGB-Mini LED technology. And if you think this TV is absolutely massive, just wait until you look at the box. Basically, you can live inside it, and I believe that my wife will probably throw me out of the bedroom after I buy this TV. So I have to go stay inside this box here. But let's talk about this TV. It uses RGB Mini LED technology, which means that it has individual red, green, and blue LEDs inside an optical module, which is individually controllable. This means that you can actually output red, green, and blue without needing any quantum dot enhancement filter. This increases the power efficiency, and also it provides a purer color wavelength, and therefore it expands the color gamut massively. I measured a Rec 2020 coverage of 93% in UV terms on this particular 116-inch sample, and it is going to be slightly wider than the BT 2020 coverage provided by QD OLED, which is around 91% according to all my testing. Let's talk about the design of this TV. It uses a 6.2.2 surround sound, so there are side-firing speakers, there are top-firing speakers, and there are two subwoofers around the back, providing an immersive audio experience in conjunction with the visual quality. And it is supported on a pair of cuboid feet, as you can see here, but you can also probably wall mount it if you so wish. Just make sure that your wall is sturdy enough to actually support this sort of weight. There are a pair of handles at the back of the TV to help you in terms of the installation, but I would have preferred it if Hisense have added a couple more at the bottom for better leverage when lifting this TV. The connection ports are found on the left rear of the display. There are 3 HDMI ports, which are all HDMI 2.1, and also one Displayport with high bandwidth capability. These are all supported by a Mediatek Pentonic 800 chipset, allowing for 4K 165Hz HDR VRR gameplay. Now, let's talk about the peak brightness of this TV, because one of the advantages of RGB Mini LED technology is because, again, there are no color conversion or no, say, quantum dot filter in place. You can actually achieve a higher peak brightness, and I measured a peak brightness of 5500 nits on a 10% window at D65 white point on this particular sample, and full field brightness is 900 nits full screen, and this is the sort of impact in terms of the luminance that no OLED can reach, no QD OLED can reach even. And the PQEF tracking is fairly stable. This Hisense 116UX has around 3600 individually dimmable zones. And watching some dark scenes on this particular TV, there is no real obvious backlight fluctuation, but there are some blotchiness here and there in really challenging scenes, such as this one from Gravity. Blooming was reasonably well controlled, but would become more noticeable off-axis in a bluish hue. And color accuracy is good after I only tweaked the 2-point white balance. The average delta error is below 1 on this color checker SG chart, where 140 patches were measured. And there's only one particular error that goes beyond the humanly perceptible threshold of delta error 3. And we have talked about the Rec 2020 coverage earlier, but let's move on to motion. And 24p motion is handled smoothly without any telecenic judder. And because of LED LCD's higher pixel response time, it is actually quite beneficial to mask the mild stutter inherent in 24p film. So I don't see the need to engage motion interpolation at all. Engaging motion interpolation for 50 Hz broadcast common in PAL regions such as the UK would introduce occasional microstutter not only in many programs containing mixed edits, but also in 25p movies. So we preferred switching ultra smooth motion off for these types of content. Now, one factor that may put off video enthusiasts would be the screen uniformity on such a big screen size. You have to remember that this is the biggest single-piece TV that you can buy on the market today. So the uniformity may not be the best. I spotted some dirty screen effect at mid-grays, and also in really dark scenes, I spotted some vertical bands obvious during slow panning shots in low light sequences. But if you can look past that, the brightness is awesome. It is capable of 5500 nits, and Hisense even spec'd a peak brightness of 8000 nits in HDR dynamic mode, but we're not interested in that because that is going to have a cooler color temperature that is going to be quite inaccurate. So we're interested in a D65 accurate white point. I certainly measured at least 4800 going up to 5500 nits, depending on how long you have run the TV in for. And this is beyond what most HDR content is mastered to. Even the brightest HDR content these days is probably only going to go up to 4000 nits. So this is certainly capable of displaying HDR content without any sort of tone mapping. For gaming, input lag measured 15 milliseconds at 60 frames per second in game mode, which could be reduced to 11.5 milliseconds by enabling the refresh rate setting. At 120 frames per second, input lag measured 6.4 milliseconds with local dimming enabled, so you can still enjoy impressive responsiveness when playing reflex-based games on such a large screen. The 116UX doesn't provide a hard clip option for HDRG or source-based tone mapping, so if you follow the HDR calibration instructions on the Sony PS5 or Xbox Series X, you'll end up with MaxTML and MaxFFTML values that are far too high, causing highlight detail in HDRG-compliant games to look blown out. Our recommendation would be to set MaxTML and MaxFFTML to 2000 nits for a still impactful HDR10 presentation while preserving bright highlight detail. VRR worked well to reduce frame drops and tearing artifacts, and we detected little to no VRR flicker, likely thanks to LED LCD's higher black floor compared to OLED. Oh, before I forget, this is a VA-type LCD panel with a native contrast ratio of 4600 to 1. And the UK sample is using the VDAR platform, but the US model is going to be using Google TV, and particularly on the UK model, it supports Freely, which is basically Freeview TV, but using wireless internet. You can see that it is fairly responsive. It is certainly more responsive than the Panasonic TV that I reviewed. When you actually start watching Freely content, you can watch BBC content and then change channel. Channel surf to BBC 2 and then to BBC 3. And while I'm here, I also want to say that the upscaling is actually very impressive from the Mediatek Pentonic 800 chipset, because this is such a big TV, right? 116 inch. And if you look at the sofa there, I was basically sitting there doing my testing, and it never felt that soft. The upscaling is of high quality. And native 10-bit gradation was very good, with minimal posterization seen in the skies of the Martian 4K Blu-ray beyond what's already in the source. The gradient decontouring filter could be used to clean up in-content posterization in low bitrate material, although because the higher settings would also blur out more fine detail, we wouldn't go beyond the least aggressive setting of low. To sum it up, you won't get another TV like this at this moment in time, because there is no other TV that is larger than 116 inches, and there is no other TV on the market right now with RGB-Mini LED technology. And for the privilege of having these two unique traits, you would have to pay either 20 to 25,000 pounds or 30,000 US dollars, and it's certainly not cheap. But if you really want the biggest and the most unique on the market, then maybe that's the price you have to pay. And if you run out of money, there's always the box for you to stay in.